Beginning in New York City and continuing throughout Germany, Switzerland, France, and England, enthusiastic applause greeted the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra and chorus wherever they went. It was a 12-day tour filled with superlatives. Among them, the 340-member Atlanta group represented the largest performing arts ensemble ever to travel from the United States to Europe. It all began right here at the Robert W. Woodruff Art Center on a day very much unlike today, a much sunnier, steamier late spring morning. 9 a.m., May 25, 1988. The air was full of anticipation and smiles, while hands and shoulders were loaded with luggage. In fact, there was luggage everywhere, color-coded to make its way to the right bus and hopefully to the right hotel hours later in New York City. Amidst the luggage lugging, the Art Center loading area was filled with picture-taking, hugs, kisses, and goodbyes.
So we came to tell Daddy goodbye.
At the same time, inside the Art Center, there was a media event, official Bon Voyage send-off, complete with balloons and politicians. After the ceremony, the lugging, loading, hugging, and kissing continued right up until each of the buses left for the airport. Rain-soaked streets greeted the orchestra and chorus as they arrived at their respective hotels in New York. And the first episode of Searching for Suitcases began. The clouds had mostly cleared in time for a pre-concert reception atop the Parker Meridian, where views of the Manhattan skyline were as tempting as the appetizers. The first performance of the tour was an all-Brahms program at Carnegie Hall, where the chorus made its 5th appearance and the orchestra its 12th performance since 1971. The next day dawned with beautiful blue skies, beckoning the Atlantans to stretch their legs sightseeing, shopping, or paying a visit to that special instrument shop. Meanwhile, at Lincoln Center, the musicians' 6 tons of equipment, 86 instruments, 700 pounds of music, 200 chorus robes, 60 sets of tails, and 40 black evening dresses were being unloaded already for the 2nd time for the orchestra and chorus Lincoln Center debut. The 2,700-plus seat Avery Fisher Hall had been sold out weeks in advance. The New York audience received the Stravinsky liturgical chants and Symphony of Psalms enthusiastically, but the anticipation was clearly heightened as music director Robert Shaw walked on stage to conduct the eagerly awaited Beethoven Night. The Lincoln Center audience responded with a cheering 10-minute standing ovation. Following the concert, one New Yorker called this performance
Astonishingly fantastic.
4 hours later, orchestra and chorus members were beginning to fill up the Air France lounges at New York's Kennedy Airport while Associate General Manager Bill Siegel and Operations Assistant Jonathan Martin manned the ticket counter, trying to keep the right tickets and bag with the right musician.
But a bag went through without the right bag.
Despite the almost 3 a.m. departure to West Berlin, the youngest member on the tour, Stephanie Chalafour, daughter of Associate Concertmaster Martin Chalafour and Artistic Administrator Nancy Chalafour, appeared to take everything in stride, or stroller. For more than half the people on the tour, flying to Europe was a new experience. Some got a little sleep on the flight to Berlin, some got no sleep, and as morning dawned, some were still trying to sleep. The landing a few hours later at West Berlin's Tegel Airport was a good one, though moments after the plane came to a stop, a 10-minute wind, rain, and hailstorm blew cargo bins around underneath the plane and kept the weary musicians on the plane longer than they would have liked. And as the musicians deplaned, young Stephanie Chalafour appeared to have fared best of all on the more than 7-hour flight. As the Atlanta group walked toward the Tegel terminal, the heightened level of security normal for European air travel escaped no one's notice. But most travelers' concerns centered on catching up with their luggage, passing through passport control, and heading toward the Berlin hotels. Meanwhile, the first bins of instruments and equipment were also off the plane and safely on the ground. After an abnormally warm night in their Berlin hotels, the orchestra and chorus members headed out into the mid and upper 80s temperatures on Saturday to tour West Berlin by bus. After passing by Checkpoint Charlie, the buses first stopped at the Berlin Wall. The miles of graffiti scrawled on the western wall proved to be captivating reading. Many of the messages deeply touched the musicians.
The war and the dividing of the city now, it's really overwhelming tragedy that's taking place here, and apparently they're still experiencing.
Sunday again dawned unseasonably warm for Berlin in late May, with the Atlantans heading out this time for a 7-hour tour of East Berlin. The stop at Checkpoint Charlie seemed to last forever, but actually took less than an hour to go through. The musicians got a glimpse of the Schauspielhaus, where they'd be performing the next day. They saw all of the Brandenburg Gate, this time without the Berlin Wall obscuring the view, and the standard street scenes of the city, which many found eerily empty, absent of people. When asked where all the people were, the East German guide explained that just like Westerners, East Berliners had both city and country houses, and on Sunday, most were relaxing at their country residences. The first real stop on the East Berlin tour was, not surprisingly, at the Soviet War Memorial. The group found the grounds beautiful and immaculate, with a cross-section of international tourists alongside the Atlantans. The tour guide explained to fascinated listeners the history and significance of the memorial.
If you look to the hill, this is such a hill of honor. Many memorials in the Soviet Union have the same style.
The fascination and curiosity extended to the Eastern Bloc soldiers also walking through the memorial. Again, there was plenty of picture taking, both amateur and professional.
Everybody wait. Isn't that cute?
After the memorial tour, it was back on the bus, with the next stop at a local cafe. There was plenty of space to eat outside and watch the East Germans boating down the nearby river. The Atlantans sampled both the traditional German food and drink, enjoyed the warm midday sun, and tried to decide on the best postcards to send back home.
This would be a good one to send to my parents.
There was also unexpected exposure to East German musicians, who also appeared to have their own budding young music critic to contend with. Back on the buses down a tree-lined boulevard, the next stop was the Pergamon Museum, where we were not allowed to videotape. So along with some of the musicians, we watched the trains pass nearby. And discovered a publicity poster of the next day's concert with an unusual identification of the group's conductor. Monday, Memorial Day, found the musicians back at Checkpoint Charlie, again taking almost an hour to check the Atlantans through. The entire group of more than 300 was treated to traditional German fare in a park food hall before the concert.
Also the site of a very nice
Then, on the bus ride back to the Schauspiel House, at least one group of musicians was treated to an impromptu tour commentary by the bus driver, translated by tour interpreter Rebecca Duplantier.
built in the 14th century.
Arriving at the Schauspiel House, the building somehow looked even more beautiful and imposing than the day before to those who'd seen it on the tour. Once inside, the anticipation built for the Atlantans' first performance in a communist country. The concert had been sold out, even at the unusual day and hour, a Monday afternoon at 5 o'clock. And as the players checked their instruments on stage, conductor Shaw and production stage manager Robert Russell checked out and discussed the hall and its warm, luscious sound. The anticipation continued to build once the musicians cleared the stage and the audience started to fill the hall. Applause broke out as the chorus walked on stage. And as the concert began with Stravinsky's Symphony of Psalms, everyone could tell it was about to be a very special afternoon. The applause was enthusiastic at intermission after the Stravinsky, but even as the crews rearranged the stage for the second half of the concert, everyone sensed that the East Berlin performance of Beethoven's Ninth was going to be something very special. The applause that started at the conclusion of the ninth continued through 8 curtain calls. There were cries of bravo, and some in the audience simply cried. Mr. Shaw finally took concertmaster William Prussel's arm to begin leading the orchestra and chorus off stage. But still, the standing ovation continued for 12 minutes until everyone in the orchestra and chorus had left the stage. Mr. Shaw was besieged by autograph seekers just inside the stage door after the East Berlin performance.
Alles Gute und kommen Sie wieder.
Thank you, Yes.
There were smiles all around as programs and papers covered the table for signings. Several of the bolder East Germans tried to pass on stacks of letters to the West under the programs to be autographed. As Mr. and Mrs. Shaw walked out of the Schauspiel House, there were even more autograph requests and well-wishers, and more attempts to pass letters to loved ones in the West. Finally, the Shaws climbed into the waiting limousine to take them back to West Berlin, but the waves and smiles continued on. Picturesque scenes and sounds of Zurich, Switzerland greeted the musicians midday Tuesday, after the group had that morning boarded buses, passed once again from West to East Berlin through Checkpoint Charlie, boarded East Berlin's Interflug airline, cleared customs at Zurich International Airport, and boarded more buses for Zurich's Hotel Nova Park. Unfortunately, there were only a couple of hours to see Zurich before the concert. By 7 o'clock, the chorus was warming up and rehearsing in Zurich's Grosser Tonhalle, which opened in 1895. It was in this hall that Mr. Shaw's personal podium, which had traveled with the tons of equipment throughout the tour, would not fit. In fact, once the stage was set, some chorus members overflowed into areas that normally seat the audience. Space notwithstanding, the Zurich performance was also an unqualified success. It was the only European performance that did not include the Beethoven Ninth. Instead, the highlight was the Mozart Mass in C minor, the Great. The applause that followed lasted for about 8 minutes. The Swiss audience began stamping their feet and clapping rhythmically. For the Swiss, even greater praise than a standing ovation. After the concert, several of the performers were honored at the Consul General's residence in Zurich. The next morning found the musicians back on the buses, rolling through the Swiss and German countryside, with glimpses of the Black Forest racing by. Along the way, on the 145-mile bus trip from Zurich to the next concert stop near Stuttgart, Germany, the buses stopped in Hagerlach, Germany for lunch. Again, the food was typical German fare. And with so many orders in such a short time, the German waitress literally raced around with arms full of food trying to find the right table. Back outside, the Atlanta musicians turned tourists enjoyed the sights and sounds of Hagerlach. Principal cellist Christopher Rex was beginning one of his watercolors of scenes along the tour. It ended up looking like this. That evening's concert was in the newly opened Theater im Forum in Ludwigsburg. The Atlanta musicians were the first American orchestra and only the second in the world to perform in the hall. The concert was sold out. The Beethoven Ninth was back on the program. And once again, the applause was enthusiastic. The next morning found the musicians boarding yet another Air France 747 in Stuttgart, headed for Paris. And once again, the Atlantans arrived in Paris with only a couple of hours to act like tourists before the warm-ups. But even before the warm-up, some of the Atlantans and soloists were attending a pre-concert reception at the U.S. ambassador's residence in Paris. Thursday night's concert at the Théâtre Musical de Paris Châtelet again featured the Beethoven Ninth. And in the words of the International Herald Tribune, the Paris audience responded with prolonged enthusiasm. After the performance, the musicians were treated to scenes like this during an evening bus tour. Friday morning found the musicians landing in Cardiff, Wales. It was then a 2-hour bus ride from Wales to Bristol, where the Atlanta musicians stretched their legs walking along the waterfront. Atlanta's Bristol performance was part of the 1988 Bath International Festival of Music and the Arts. The concert was followed by a reception that included the Lord Mayor of Bristol. And in addition to the evening's performance itself, the Lord Mayor received yet another reason to remember the Atlantans' visit. A souvenir T-shirt from ASO Executive Vice President and General Manager Tom Becchetti. The next morning found the Atlantans back on the bus, headed from Bristol to London, the site of the 6th and final performance of Beethoven's 9th. But a torrential London downpour kept the musicians from doing much first-hand sightseeing in the few hours available Saturday afternoon. The skies cleared in time for the final performance of the tour Saturday night at London's Royal Festival Hall. And it was this finale of the night that brought the normally reserved Londoners to their feet for a standing ovation. The emotional intensity continued at the post-performance reception for all the musicians in Royal Festival Hall, amidst many more hugs and kisses, and a command performance speech for the man behind the scenes who orchestrated the logistics of the tour without a single lost bag.
It's been a good tour, and I thank you very much.
The chorus responded with their own special tribute. Then, following an emotional farewell for the Shaws, an exuberant Tom Becchetti summed up what the Atlanta musicians had achieved.
We've proven that there is a very, very good orchestra in Atlanta. And we said before we took this trip that it's one of the acts of coming of age. It's a rite of passage of symphony orchestras to make a European tour and test themselves and see how well they're received. Well, I'll tell you, we were received very well. I think the people in Atlanta can rightfully be very proud of their symphony orchestra.
Homegrown applause greeted the orchestra and chorus Sunday afternoon following a 9-hour flight from London to Atlanta. But there was still more luggage to lug for the final bus ride back to the Art Center. And among all the lofty thoughts the musicians brought back from the tour, one universal question brought some of the musicians solidly back down to earth.